All right, good morning. Welcome back to For the Glory of God and Kings. I'm your host, Travis Finley, and we are reading the Bible for the first time again. And we are in Genesis chapter 2. What we're doing as we're reading through the scriptures is we are learning to read past the surface. We are learning to pull the curtain back and see what is going on behind the scenes. We are learning to read between the lines. We are learning to squint when we read because we understand that God has not only revealed things to us on the surface, that is, we can understand the basic message of the sentence structures that we read. However, those propositions are given to us in a literary fashion so that it reveals more than what's on the surface. And we just have to understand that. That's just plain and simple. And if that doesn't make sense to you, or if you want to challenge that, I welcome your interactions on the YouTube subscription. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to give thumbs up. And don't forget to make comments. You got to scroll all the way down on the page, and it'll have a little box for you to make comments. Okay. But the one thing we're going to look at today is another. It's always going to be about translation. It's always going to be about translation. Um, I am not a translation guru. I am not an expert in foreign languages. But just like you, I've got a head and I can think. And once you understand something is there, then once you understand that principle is there, oops. Um, once you understand that principle is there, then you have to start asking questions because things don't line up as nicely as we would like when it's not consistent. Okay, so we're going to look at some aspects of consistency here in Genesis chapter 2. The way Genesis chapter 2 um, ends and begins is a little bit awkward because it ends in the middle of the story of Genesis 1, and then Genesis 2 technically begins in verse 4. So chapter divisions and verses aren't always helpful, which is another aspect of translation and interpretation. When are we going to make this break in a paragraph? Because English paragraphs aren't the same as Hebrew or Greek paragraphs. It's just not. Genesis chapter 2, verse 4 says, this is these are the generations. Okay, it says, these are the generations of heaven and earth in the day they were created, when the Lord God made earth and heaven. Okay, in the rest of the book of Genesis, you're going to see that designation 9 more times for a total of 10. These are the generations of. Whenever you see that in the next 9 instances, it's always in reference to biological descent. So, put your interpretive thinking caps on. If 9 out of 10 references of these are the generations of, if 9 out of 10 of those are about biological descent, would it be strange if the one time when it refers to heaven and earth isn't about biological descent? 1 out of 10 is gonna break the pattern. Uh, it's a question worth asking, right? Okay. In the previous episode, we talked about the generic term for God in Genesis chapter 1, Elohim, plural, Elohim. But it's a generic term for God and gods. It's used all the time in the Old Testament, referring to the one true God and also referring to the other Elohim in that familia, okay, in that arena of beings. Here in Genesis 2:4, we have an introduction to a new term where we read in the English in all capitals Lord. Okay, this is these are the generations of heaven and earth in the day that they were created when the Lord God created earth and heaven. The translation, in my opinion, should read Yahweh. Okay, that is God's personal name. When Moses was going to go to the Israelites and say, "The God of your forefathers has commissioned me to bring you out of slavery and into the glorious kingdom of His beloved Son," and they say to me, "Who sent you?" What should I tell them? God did not say to Moses, "Well, if I give you my name and then I give you a command not to use my name in vain, then people are going to try to avoid using my name. So let's just mix my name Yahweh with Adonai, and then we'll just put it in all capital letters in English, and it's Lord. My name's Lord." No. He gives Moses his personal name. And all throughout the Old Testament, whoever calls on the name of Yahweh will be saved. You call on Yahweh, He saves you. Please, in our English, translate God's name, what He gave us to call on. Yahweh, okay? Yahweh God created heaven and earth. Question becomes, why is Yahweh God here in this text when it wasn't in the text in Genesis chapter 1? That is an interesting interpretive question that I think is valid for us to consider. Okay. So as we go through this passage, I just want to highlight some other issues of translation. Okay. In Genesis 1, we are introduced to the Spirit of God who is hovering over the waters. In Hebrew, the term that is translated spirit is ruach. Ruach. It is also translated in English as wind and breath. Wind and breath. It is my opinion, it should always be translated as ruach. And then when we get to a particular context, we need to interpret what kind of ruach we're talking about. Because I think that there are more connections to be made that are dependent upon the original language having meaning than when we get into the English. So here we go. You ready? In Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, it says that darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God, the Ruach of God, was hovering over the face of the waters. Okay, you got that? Now, when God creates man, look and see what we have here. Then Yahweh God formed man of dust from the ground and ruached into his nostrils the ruach of life. And actually, I messed up because I was going to read it the way it should be read. He breathed into his face. Okay? So, right there, when God creates man and breathes into his face, we've already seen the terms face in Genesis 1. Genesis 1, the darkness was over the face of the deep. The Spirit was hovering over the face of the waters. When the birds of the sky are created, they are flying over the face of the heavens. Okay? There is a theology of faceness in the Bible, and we need to understand it. So my time's already up. It's 9 minutes already. Okay. I have a reference here to Genesis chapter 7 and verse 22. One of the things that intimates to me that when we talk about the animal kingdom early on in Genesis, we're actually talking about nations. And I remember learning in college and seminary that the difference between men and animals is animals didn't receive the breath of life. Only man, only Adam had God's breath in his face. Okay? However, when we get to the flood story with Noah, this is what we are told. All flesh that moved on the land perished, birds and cattle and beast, and every swarming thing that swarms upon the land. and all mankind. Of all that was on the dry land, all in whose face was the breath of the Spirit of life died. So they went into the ark to Noah, the animals, by twos of all flesh, in which was the Ruach of life. Right here in Genesis 7, we are clearly told that the designation of animals received the breath of life. I don't understand how we can say that animals didn't receive the breath of life in Genesis 2, and then in Genesis 7, when we're told that everything on the earth that had the breath of life died. We have to make these connections. And that to me, if we're going to say, okay, you ready? Here we go. If we're going to say that the difference between animals and men are that men receive the spirit of life breathed into their face, then when we have this story with Noah and we read that the animals that had the breath of life in them, it intimates to me that they're not talking about animals. The Bible is symbolically representing the nations that receive the spirit of life because they're men. You see what I'm going? You see what the connections that I'm making here? All right, we're at 12 minutes. So time goes by so fast. I'd love to hear from you guys. This is Travis Finley with the Glory of God and Kings. And until next time, we are reading the Bible for the first time again. Subscribe, make comments. Let me know you're out there. I'm off.